Crossroads, happy Wednesday. How we doing tonight? Yeah. I feel like I was witnessing some of you not just tell your autocorrect story, but you were pulling out your phone because I bet you have a story that's like, I know I'm about to tell you a story, but you won't believe it until you see it kind of story. And can I just get an amen before we jump into this little section here? Because I'm going to tell you my story, my autocorrect story, which actually involves another staff member who I think might be here tonight. But can I get an amen that the phones have an edit feature now? How many of you have been so quick to the draw on that edit feature on your, so many of you. But you don't have to go very far on the internet to find some great, well, you might have to go a little bit further to find great, clean autocorrect stories. You might have to go a little bit further to find those. But there's some great ones, and I bet many of you have had some great ones. Here's a couple that I found that I would love to share with you. How about this one here? It says, there's a burglar in the house. And the person responds, oh my gosh, call the police, get out of there. I'm coming right now. And they said, no, there's a burglar in the house. I know, I'm coming. Mom, call the cops and get out. And she says, no, there's a squirrel in the house. The panic that comes with that. This next one's good too. An update from the babysitter says, allergy meds were given to both at 9 a.m. They'll both get vodka at nap. Oh wait, Vicks. I love this. Vodka? I'll be there to pick up my kids, thank you. That's good. I love this last one right here. It says, what are you doing? I think the rain is cleaning the kid off my car. And they said, did you hit one? And they're like, hit what? And then they realized, oh, of course, autocorrect, cleaning the mud off of my car. When I was junior high pastor here, I always tried at every turn to hang out with junior highers at any cost. And there's a thing that our junior high students do here around November. What they do is they actually have an opportunity to leave school, right? They walk over together and they help set up our Christmas tree. And I think they get PE credit or whatever. And so Kelly Crawford, is Kelly here tonight? Is Kelly in the house tonight? Is she here? No? Okay, all right. I texted her because I wanted to get her permission to share this story. She laughed and said, of course you can share it. So I'm in my office and I'm working and she goes, hey, I just wanted to let you know that the junior hires from the school are making their way over to help with the Christmas tree. I said, awesome, let me know when they're there and I'll pop over and say hi to them. She texts me, and the way that they helped was the junior hires would come over and they would help fluff branches. So they would pull the branches out of the box, they'd spread them out so it doesn't look like they've been sitting in a box for a whole year, which is what they do. But they pull out the branches and they begin to fluff them, right? Fluff them. So she sends me this text, and no joke, this is exactly what it says. Hey, I'm out here right now. I'm not gonna say the word, okay? I know some of you are like, is he gonna say it? I'm not gonna say it. But remember, these junior hires were helping fluff these branches. She says, I have some junior hires out here right now fluffing branches with me. But she didn't say branches. All she said was, I have junior hires out here fluffing with me. And I read it, and you know that immediate like, oh man, this is a mistake. So I grab my phone. No joke, I make my way out of the offices right over here. I make my way out of the offices, and as I'm just rolling, Kelly is sprinting from the Christmas tree up to the offices, and she goes, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to say that. It was autocorrect. I can't believe that happened. Every single one of us have been there. How many of you guys have been there? You sent, it might have been an autocorrect. I bet some of you have sent an embarrassing text message to someone that you didn't mean to send that text message to. Hey babe, I love you, to your boss. Probably not gonna go well, you're gonna need an explanation there. But we've all been there, right? Unfortunately, when it comes to words and it comes to the things that we say, there's not an edit or a redo on the things that actually come from our mouths, is there? Sure, we could say, oh, I'm sorry, or oh, I'm just kidding, or oh, I don't mean to be offensive, or I was just messing with you. But there's something that just hits a little bit different. You've probably heard it said like this. Saying words is like squeezing toothpaste out of the toothpaste container, right? You can't get that toothpaste back in. And words are kind of the same way. And yeah, it's funny with text messages, but the reality is we've all said things that have hurt other people, but we've also been on the receiving end of things. And I bet if I asked you, every single one of you, whether you're in here, whether you're watching online, if I asked every single one of you, can you recall a time where somebody said something hurtful to you? You know what I bet every single one of us would say? It wouldn't be something that was said today. It would be something that was said to us 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Why? Because the power of words has incredible control over our lives, and that can be both for good, and of course it can be for bad. We're in a series on Wednesday night where we're going through the book of James, and we're beginning to turn the corner, sort of this halfway mark throughout the book of James. And if you're brand new, I encourage you to go back and check out some of the messages that we've had as we've just journeyed through. Tonight we're going to be in James chapter 3. However, I want to quickly recap what the first two chapters were all about. Chapter 1 was all about Christians, written by this author, James, that Christians would take a confident stand. That they would take a confident stand, which would reveal what a Christian has. Namely, faith, endurance, able to stand the test of trials, able to withstand temptation. And James talks about how important it is for us to take a confident stand. Number 2, by the way, if you guys love alliteration, this message is so for you tonight, okay? All right? This is going to be right up your alliterative alley or whatever. Anyway. Chapter 2, which is what we wrapped up last week, or rather 2 weeks ago, was all about compassionate service, which reveals what a Christian does, namely treat everyone fairly and equally, not just talk about loving others and loving God, but actually going about and doing it. That the things that we say we are going to do are not just words, but there's actually actions that back those things up. Tonight we open up with chapter 3. And we're going to be looking at the first 12 verses of chapter 3, which are all about careful speech, which reveals what a Christian says. And tonight's message is all about controlling the tongue, controlling the words that come from our mouth, because believe it or not, every single one of us has the ability to control what comes from our mouth. The other side of that is, none of us has the ability to control what comes out of other people's mouths. That's an important distinction tonight, that we can't control what other people say, but you better believe that we can always control what comes from our mouth. James chapter 3, starting in verse 1, says this: "Dear brothers and sisters, not many of you should become teachers in the church, for we who teach will be judged more strictly." Now I got to pause here, and you're going to have to take my word on this for a second, but this verse is going to look vastly different than a lot of what we read. James is making this argument, he's presenting this contention to his listeners that for those of you that teach, you got to make sure that, not many of you should teach. Now, when James writes this letter, context is so incredibly important. This letter is generally identified to be written between 45 and 50 AD. That's about 8 to 10 years or so after Jesus would have died and resurrected. So we're about 8 years or so after Jesus' ministry. Now, you don't have to look very far in the sports world. You don't have to look very far in terms of trends. When things get popular, they get popular super fast, right? You don't have to go very far in our world today. You go to like big public places, right? And the most amount of jerseys that you're going to see out in public are all San Francisco 49er jerseys and Kansas City Chiefs jerseys. Why? Because they're the two likely best teams that have been good for the last few years. And so when that gets good, all the people jump off their other bandwagons and they decide, I'm going to be a 49ers fan. And you especially see it with kids. Why? Because it's popular, it's exciting, there's something amazing. Oh my gosh, that's my new favorite player. It's no different than what they're experiencing with this message of Jesus that would have revolutionized people's lives for 3 years, and all of a sudden, incredible things are beginning to happen. The early church has been born. The message is continuing to spread. What do you think is going to happen? Everybody wants to go get the Jesus jersey and be like, I want to teach just like Jesus taught. I want to be a quarterback like Patrick Mahomes is a quarterback. I prefer to say I like to be a quarterback like Josh Allen is. Anyway, we won't go there. Still hurting. But I want to be like Jesus. And so what happens is there were a bunch of people that got super excited about, well, I want to teach. I want to do what Jesus did, and I want to go stand on a hillside and have thousands of people listen to me. And James is saying, whoa. You got to be really careful here, because you're actually going to be judged a little bit more harshly for the things that you say. You see, what we have to understand about that culture is teachers or rabbis within the Jewish religion were held in the highest esteem. In fact, a Jewish person could have been in the presence of their parents, which is it's a massive honor culture in the Middle East. And so what happens is you might have been with your parents, and if the rabbi walked in, everybody stood up. But if you were in a room and your parents walked in, you didn't stand up. You didn't stand up for them. The one person that people stood up for were rabbis. So people would stand up. Why? Because they wanted to honor. So you could imagine, like, everybody's like, oh my gosh, that must be amazing to be like, I want to go get my Jesus jersey on NFL.net or .shop or .com or whatever it is, and I want to be just like he was. And Jesus is warning here, this is so incredibly important that you understand that those who teach will be judged more strictly. They will be judged more strictly. There was a massive influx of people who wanted to begin to communicate. James's point here is not that he's concerned about these people spewing lies, though heresy was beginning to be a massive thing where people were confusing and mixing up and really getting the message of Jesus wrong. Many people would get it wrong when they would teach it, and they would be judged more harshly. But what James is really getting at here is he wants his greater audience, those who are proclaiming to be Christians. Remember, this is written to an audience who are recent Jewish converts to Christianity. And he's saying your words matter. And you shouldn't have a desire to teach, because what I'm about to lay out in verses 2 through 12 will indicate there's a massive responsibility that you have. And if you do teach, you're going to be judged more strictly. A lot of what James is about to share here is this. You might have all the right things to say, but he wants them to know you might have all the right things, but it's how you communicate these things that actually matter. He wants his audience to know that your words are incredibly powerful, namely this. Your words can tear people down, or your words can build people up. And if you think about the people that have spoken life into you and built you up in your life, you remember those words. But you know what you almost can never shake from your mind? In fact, it's probably a little bit more clear and less foggy about what was actually said are the words when somebody begins to tear you down. That's how powerful words are. But this isn't the first time that James actually addresses the importance of words. If we go back to James chapter 1, verse 26, check out what James says. He says, if you claim to be religious, but you don't control your tongue, you're just fooling yourself, and your religion is worthless. Your religion is worthless. This claim that you have about being a follower of Jesus, it's worthless. And if you can't control your tongue, how do you look any different than the world? How do you look any different than a Jewish audience that, namely, rejected Jesus, didn't believe that he was who he said he was? And now all of a sudden, because of your words and because of your hateful speech and because of the way that you conduct yourselves and the things that are coming out of your mouth, you actually look no different than the people around you. So while this letter is so incredibly important for his readers 2,000 years ago, it remains phenomenally important for us today. There's three things that I want to get at tonight. How can we change the course of negativity that comes from our mouths? How can we change the course of the negativity that comes from our mouths? I want to share three things with you as we dive through and as we tear apart James tonight. Number one, how can we break this cycle? Number one, we must be able to communicate with caution. We have to communicate with caution. Why is it important to communicate with caution? I'm going to share 5 different things tonight in addition to the 3 things. So like I said, if you like alliteration, this is for you tonight. So we have to communicate with caution, and there's two reasons why it's so important we do that. Number one, it's because our tongue is actually directive. Our tongue can actually veer off course. It can change the course of not only our lives, but the lives of other people. This is what James says in James 3, 2 through 5. He continues, he says, "For if we could control our tongues, we would be perfect." Think about that. If you could control your tongue, you would be perfect. I love the implication here because we all know that none of us can be perfect, which means what? None of us can control our tongues. No matter how hard we try, we can't do it. Oh, I want to say that comeback so bad. Where am I? I got to get the last word in an argument kind of people. If you're not raising your hand, you're probably getting elbowed right now is probably what's happening. Oh, I just got to get that. Just got to get that last word in. I got to really tell them. Our words are directive. For if we could control our tongues, we'd be perfect. None of us are. And guess what? You could also control yourselves in every other way. Isn't that amazing? Verse 3. We can make a large horse go wherever we want by the means of a small bit in its mouth. And a small rudder can make a huge ship turn wherever the pilot chooses to go, even though the winds are strong. And in the same way, the tongue is a small thing that makes grand speeches. The tongue is directive, and it actually not only determines the course of your life, but it determines the course of other people's lives based on the words that you speak over other people. About a week ago, I shared a message on a weekend, and I talked about my beat-up 2002 Ford Explorer. And it kind of went viral, and it's up on our Instagram page, and we're poking fun at it. And the best part about that car is, and it's true, in order to turn off the radio, I have to lean across my car, and I have to grab the door handle of the passenger door, and I have to open it up just slightly because the door switch in the driver door doesn't work. And then I got to shut the door. So I'm like amazingly pliable. Like I'm super stretchy. Like it's really good, and that's really good for me. There's another issue with my car right now. The alignment is off. It is. If you went to go drive my car and you held that steering wheel straight, you would veer right. Like pretty significantly, honestly. You would veer right. And I think sometimes our words are similar to a misaligned vehicle where our tire alignment is messed up. All of a sudden, we have to now make an adjustment and we have to remember where we're supposed to be. And all of a sudden we think, how come I'm not going in the direction that I want to go? Because if I turn this wheel exactly where I'm supposed to go, I don't intend to come over in another lane. I don't intend to mean harm when I say these words. But because we're misaligned, we're out of luck. So to guess where my steering wheel has to be, it's not 10 and 2. Like my hands are at like 925 and 233 to keep that thing going straight. Like that's what I got to do here. And it's the exact same thing. You see, our words are incredibly directive. And they determine where we can go. It determines the course of our life. It also determines the course of other people's lives, which means the words that we speak over people are incredibly, incredibly powerful. I'm going to provide a truth for each of these 5 D's that we go through. So this first one is directive. There's a truth associated with that. Even though our tongue is directive, here's a truth. We have the ability to tell our tongue what to say. We have that ability. For me, I have to hold my tongue oftentimes. Where are my tongue holders out there? Any of you guys? Yep. I need a constant tongue depressor from the doctor's office to just jam in there every time I feel like I got a comment to say. We have the ability to tell our tongue what to say. Remember, we can control our tongue, but we cannot control other people. And oftentimes, because we can't control other people, guess what happens? We try to control other people because they shouldn't be saying the things that they're saying. So in order to get back at them, I'm going to wield a hard or harsh word back at them. But the reality is if we're going to be directing the course of our life and the lives around us by what we say, we need to remember that we have the ability to tell our tongue what to say. But there's a second reason why it's so important to communicate with caution. There's a second reason why it's so important to communicate with caution First, our tongue is directive, but secondly, our tongue is also destructive. Oh man, our tongues are destructive. Our words can be so phenomenally destructive. James continues in verses 5 and 6. He says, "But a tiny spark can set a great forest on fire. Among all the parts of the body, the tongue is a flame of fire, and it can set your whole life on fire, for it is set on fire by hell itself." That's incredible. I think about the reality of some of the relationships that we're in, and some of these relationships that we're in are relationships that have been harmed because of the things that we've said, because of the things that have been talked about, because of the things that have been shared with one another, because we want to get our way, or because we want to harm another person. It might be a boss, a coworker, a friend. It might be a child. It might even be a spouse. There was a study done years ago by a guy by the name of Dr. John Gottman, who's a clinical psychologist and professor. And he was seeking to understand the difference between happy and unhappy couples. And this began a long series of study that actually began in the 1970s. And what they did is they sat couples down and they asked them to solve a problem in 15 minutes, to take a conflict and solve it in 15 minutes. And you know what they found? After carefully reviewing the tapes and all the dialogue and all of the body language and all of the words that were shared with one another, they discovered that 9 years later, they were able to predict up to 90% with up to 90% accuracy the couples that were able to stay together. They were able to predict it just based off of a 15-minute conflict resolution session. And as they began to study, Dr. Gottman actually developed, he calls it this magic ratio. He's coined this term, and he says this, that the discovery was simple. And it was this: the difference between happy and unhappy couples is the balance between positive and negative interactions during conflict. By the way, you want to guess when the tongue is at its most scary and most injury-wielding, like harmful, is in conflict. Why? Because we don't like to be told that we're doing something wrong. We don't like to be told that we were doing something that we shouldn't have been doing. We don't like to be called out. Accountability is hard. And so the moment that happens, our tongue, just like James says, is set on fire by hell itself. You are literally spewing hell on the person, whether it be in your marriage. In this case, in this study, it's a marriage. But we know that could leak into how we treat our coworkers, our boss, our children, our friends, people on the 91 freeway. Their discovery was super simple. And what happens was, this was the antidote to that. This was hey, we have something that we believe is true of all of these couples. The 90% accuracy that they had with these couples, they could predict it based on the 15 minutes. They created what they call the magic ratio. And the magic ratio is 5 to 1. Sear that into your brain, 5 to 1. This means that for every negative interaction that you have during a conflict, a stable and happy marriage has 5 or more positive interactions. Can you imagine? Over a 15-minute period, 15 minutes, you could have 5 positive interactions. And then you're allowed 1, right? Chances are you start off with the 1, and then you got to somehow make up the 5, right? That's typically how that goes. But it's truly incredible that our tongue can be truly destructive. Words hurt. Words are harmful. In Proverbs 18:21, it says this: the tongue can bring life or death. Those who love to talk will reap the consequences. The implication here, those who love to talk and love to be negative or love to spew negativity So I wonder what marriage might benefit from upping the number of positive interactions and beginning to work on decreasing the number of negative interactions. What kind of working relationship that you have in your life, a professional relationship, needs to begin, that you need to instigate, that you need to promote a better, healthy balance of, I'm going to work on trying to, remember, I can only control my tongue. I can't control what my boss says. I can't control what my kids say. I can't control what my friend says. Will you commit to working to get that up to, I need to have 5 positive interactions, and I need to reduce the number of negative interactions. Here's the truth associated with it. Even though our tongue is destructive, here's the truth. You have the ability to build up. You have the ability to build up. Will you speak life over your spouse? Will you speak life over your children? Will you speak life over the relationships in your life? Number one, we have to communicate with caution. Number two, we have to cultivate control. We have to cultivate control. And there's a couple of dangerous things that we see here. Here's why we have to cultivate control. Number one, the tongue is defiling. The tongue is defiling. James continues at the end of verse 6. He says, the tongue is like a whole world of wickedness, corrupting your entire body. It corrupts your entire body. My kids are 12 and 9 now, and every time I have a conversation with somebody or I meet somebody new, you kind of talk, tell me about yourself, I'm married, got a couple kids. And genuinely, we are in what I believe is the most fun stage. My wife loved the baby stage. I did not very much. I like babies. But man, that's probably why I was a youth guy for a long time. I love when they get older. And so I feel like we're in such a sweet spot. But there's a new thing that our kids do that they didn't do when they were babies. And it's this amazing skill that every single kid has. And it's innate in them. No one has to teach them this. You ready? They backtalk. Woo-wee. Man, 12 and 9, man. Lack of sleep, not enough protein, you got a recipe for disaster. And I feel like we face it a lot. And they're able to snap back at us. I bet some of you have had the opportunity to experience that if you've had kids, or maybe you've had a niece or nephew, or you have your grandkids over and you're like, where did you get so sassy? Maybe that's not the word you used. And we think, where did this come from? Remember, can you control what they say? Nope. I can only control what I say. So every time that my kid snaps back at me, guess what my natural, fleshly, sinful desire is? Oh, you think you're so smart, do you? And I come back with some comeback of my own. And I'm not going to ask you to raise hands for people that have done it, because if you have kids, I already know the answer. If you've got grandkids, I already know the answer. You got nieces and nephews, I already know the answer. You got neighbor kids, I already know the answer. We've all been there. But the reality is, our tongue is truly defiling. How are you responding when somebody snaps at you? How are you responding when the sass comes in super strong from your kids? And I'm in that phase right now where I have to pause. Because if my kids go here, my natural reaction is, oh, you think you're big stuff? Watch me get big. And then they get big, and then I get big, and then they get big, and then the explosion has happened, and it's horrible. And all of a sudden, we've got 20 negative things that are happening and no positive interactions. None of them. How are you responding? Are you building them up? Are you tearing them down? Ephesians 4:29 says this, don't use foul or abusive language. Let everything, even the things you say to your kids, let everything you say be good and helpful, so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them. For those who hear them, because if chances are, if you've got a snarky remark headed back towards your kids, you're going to say it loud enough so that they can hear you. Because their comment, oh, they're for sure going to say it loud enough, right? We don't even need to get into the nonverbal communication, right? Anybody got daughters out there? Anybody got a daughter out there? My 12-year-old, the eye roll doesn't have to be taught. There's no YouTube videos out there to learn an eye roll. It just happens, right? We don't even need to get into the nonverbal communication because I can't control. I can teach and I can correct, but I can't do any of that if the first words out of my mouth are defiling, are hurtful, are painful, are sharp, are, oh, I see. We're going to play that game? I'll play that game, says the 40-year-old to the 12-year-old. Here's the truth. Though our tongue is defiling, here's the truth we need to embrace. We have the ability to purify our speech. We can purify it. And you know what it almost starts with? You got to pause. You have to pause. Sometimes you have to ask yourself, is what I'm about to say going to be helpful? I'll never forget one of the greatest things that I've ever heard. We were preparing for a message, I don't know, it was maybe a couple years ago or a year ago, and Pastor Talia, who's the executive pastor of ministries here, we were in a sermon prep, and I think it might have been a message that I was preaching, and we were talking about, it must have been about words or something, I don't really remember, but I remember what she said. She said, if you ever feel like you walk away from the conversation with somebody, and you walk away and you can say to yourself, boy, I showed them, you probably did it wrong. Think about it. You probably did it wrong. That's 100% true. I would guarantee it's 100% where you walk away and you're like, oh, I showed them. And yet what you've done is you've allowed this defiling part of your body to tear somebody else down. But the reality is you have the ability to purify your speech, which almost always begins with, are you ready to hit pause? Are you ready to hit pause? So while we have to cultivate control, we understand that our tongue is defiling, but there's another aspect of why it's so important to cultivate control. Our tongue is dangerous. Our tongue is dangerous. Verses 7 and 8, James says this, people can tame all kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, gross, and fish, but no one can tame the tongue. It is restless and evil and full of deadly poison. Full of deadly poison. You want to know what the biggest lie is that you were fed when you were a little kid? You want to know what it is? I already know it. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I bet every single one of us said that. And that was all a front because words hurt. Or what about this one? This is like a close second. Whatever you say bounces off me and sticks to you. Anybody remember that one? Maybe just the millennial crowd knows that one. That was a frequent statement said on the playground at recess. Whatever you say bounces off me and sticks to you. No, it doesn't. It sticks. And it breaks. And it hurts. And we all have examples of the times where we've been torn down by other people's words, and yet oftentimes we miss that we have torn other people down. The tongue is so incredibly dangerous. Here's the truth associated with that. You have the ability to create safe environments. You have the ability to create safe environments. The people that are closest in your life, that you would say are closest in your life, do they feel like they can come to you and share things with you? One of the things that I'm wrestling with having two young kids that I know are not done sinning and not done doing things that they shouldn't do, and I know that that's coming. But I sure do hope that I'm fostering the kind of relationship and a safe environment for my kids where when something goes bad and they recognize that they've done something, that I've been able to create such a safe environment in their life that I haven't allowed my tongue to be dangerous, that they now suddenly fear being open with me, that they would be able to come to me and say, Dad, I need to talk to you. I did something. Would you say that the closest people in your life, and I don't know who that is, you're going to have to fill in the blank for yourself, that they would be able to come to you? Or is it You know what? I don't know that anybody confides in me. I don't know that anybody is willing to come to me because I got a quick fuse. I get angry, I yell, I say nasty things. There's no sense of safety when it comes to people coming to you. And that's alarming. I know as a dad, it really changes the way that I think about those environments. Will there be consequences? Of course. They know that. But will my tongue be able to be controlled in a way where I'm not creating a dangerous environment, but I'm creating a safe environment? This is what James wants us to understand. Ultimately, James' biggest fear was this, that somebody would say one thing, but they wouldn't go live it out. So we have to communicate with caution. We have to cultivate control. And then number 3, we must conduct ourselves with consistency. We must conduct ourselves with consistency. This is incredibly important. The way that we would describe this fifth and final aspect of these 3 things, the 5th D that we're talking about tonight, is that our tongue is duplicitous. Our tongue is often guilty of presenting double standards, to say one thing, but then maybe mean another thing, or say that we're going to do one thing, but then we absolutely don't do it. And all of a sudden, we are almost like a walking hypocrisy, that what we say certainly is not what our actions detail. James says it like this in verses 9 through 12. He says, sometimes it praises, speaking of the tongue, sometimes the tongue praises our Lord and Father, and sometimes it curses those who have been made in the image of God. I love that little tagline. He probably didn't need to say, made in the image of God. He probably could have just left it at, some praise our Lord and Father, and then sometimes it curses other people. But he wants for you to remember that no matter how harsh somebody is with you, that doesn't negate the fact that they haven't been made and created and viewed in the image of God. And you know what? Even though somebody might say that to us, we're often guilty of this, and I bet every single one of us would never want to be missed by our Creator as being created in His image. And so James is offering that reminder. I love that. Sometimes it praises our Lord and Father, and sometimes it curses those who have been made in the image of God. And so blessing and cursing come pouring out of the same mouth. Surely, my brothers and sisters, this is not right. Does a spring of water bubble out with both fresh water and bitter water? Does a fig tree produce olives or a grapevine produce figs? Nope. And you can't draw fresh water from a salty spring. If you're a believer in here, and you would say that your relationship with the Lord is by and large where it should be. There's a level of accountability that we are called to in this particular passage, but there's something that happens in us where all of a sudden we kind of want to be viewed like we're not like too removed from the world. So we might cuss up a storm, and we might say all kinds of foul language. Why? Because, well, I don't want to be viewed as like a little Christian nerd. Like I want to be cool. So watch this, blank that. And all of a sudden we'll just throw stuff out, and we think, oh man, this is a great way for me to feel like I'm still a part of the culture. James' contention throughout this whole letter, and we're going to keep getting into the rest of chapter 3 next week, and we got 4 and 5 still left, is this: we ought not look like the world. We ought not reflect what the world stands for. Because what happens is, people hear the things that come from our mouth, they see how we treat other people, they witness an interaction, they hear the words that are coming out of our mouth, and to them it's like, why would I need what they have? They're already like me. Which is a great question and a great gut check and a great heart check on that. What this does is it harms our witness. It harms the ability to understand that God gives us ability. God gives us power. God will enable us. so that we can control our tongue. And oftentimes, you got to cry out to him for that help. But we have the ability to do this. James is saying, you better be way different than the world. You better be way different. There shouldn't be lies coming from your mouth. There shouldn't be deceit, deception. The things that you say, you better mean them. Mean what you say and say what you mean. This is James's whole point right here. Here's the truth of this. Here's the truth of this. Intentionality leads to consistency. You see, when our words are actually intentional, that actually breeds consistent communication in our talk. When we moved to Corona a little over a year ago, my wife began to bring our kids to school. And she works at the school, and so the kids want to go with her early because they want to hang out with their friends before school and all that stuff. And so they would go, and there was something happening in the car on the drive to school that I didn't know about. So they would get in the car, and it's a short drive. It's just a few minutes, and it's a short drive to school here. And my wife would ask them, I want you to tell me one thing that you're grateful for. I want you to tell me one thing that you're grateful for. So they would say one thing that they're grateful for. My wife wants to breed this idea that she wants them to constantly be aware of things that they're grateful for. I didn't know this was happening, okay? I didn't know this was happening during this school year when we had moved here. So at bedtime, so kids are going to bed, walk in there, hanging out with them, spending some time with them before bed, all the stuff. And I say, hey, before we pray tonight, tell me one thing that you were grateful for from today. And so I began this process. I had no idea that my wife was doing it. So I began to do this. And Monday through Friday, drive to school. They're getting hit with that question. Every single night, Saturday to Sunday, or Sunday to Saturday, whatever, they're getting the same question. A couple weeks in, I'm with Cade in his room one night, and I asked him, Cade, tell me one thing that you're grateful for. And he had a tough day. It was a long day, lots of things going on, and he goes, why do you guys always ask me, what am I grateful for? And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, you ask me, mom asks me, and you guys do it every single day. And I was like, what? When does mom ask you? Every time we get in the car to go to school, mom asks, what are you grateful for? And he begins to talk about it. You see, my wife and I learned, neither of us knew that we were doing this. I don't know if it's bad parent, maybe it's great parent, who knows? Neither of us knew that we were doing this, and we learned that they got the point after a while because they know. Now they know as they go throughout their day. It's not about like, am I going to score a touchdown at recess or am I going to be able to hang out with my friends at lunchtime? It's, I better figure out and identify something that I'm grateful for because I know that question is coming. You see, our speech, the things that we want our kids to be able to see, the things that we want the people around us to be able to see, we want to be extremely intentional there. And when there's intentionality, there's consistency.